Hey everybody, thanks for being here. We're excited to be at the last Fireside, and I want to start it by just taking a look at some of the projects that presented at Showcase and use it as a way to think about just like the zeitgeist that at least we're feeling, um, and how the group is contributing to and helping shape it. You had Rev's project commit at the beginning, which is an on-chain accountability protocol, really thinking about these credible commitments. Clara, who's here today, working on affordable housing and the crisis of sorts that is occurring in large major cities where most people um, at the median income level are struggling. Uh, Potlatch, private peer-to-peer commerce and physical goods. Think uh, if you wanted to send something physically to someone on the internet without needing to know their address, how would you do it? Your concordance with Acacia, I think really thinking about like beyond tokens, what is going on in crypto and what would really make for a cleaner developer experience across chains and for towards coordination. Aesthetic realms, which Vesta describes as embodied learning for the evolving web, just like really great um, storytelling. Also, Kitoki, uh, video dance community and project, and Steph's contributions to Kernel have gone uh, kind of like well beyond um, anything that I could have imagined. Sam with hyper personal technology, this one I feel like very obviously like in the zeitgeist, but how it actually gets instantiated with this um, key pair uh, that helps bring our data everywhere when interfaces change. What does it look like if our data can move with us like our clothes? What are the interoperable apps that can build on top of that? Mike's work on impact and uh, kind of like seeing what's real in the public goods funding space. What are the regenerative mechanisms that have stuck, and how do you um, replicate? John's work on location-based apps, the spatial extension for Ethereum. I mean, he's been thinking about this for years, but location-based apps. Um, Jan thinking about transformational capital. Um, what does it look like to have like a new style of fund somewhere between a philanthropic and a venture fund? God's Power's work on lattice-based cryptography and in cryptography generally, and how to learn about those. Dan doing a lot of vibe coding, and Connor working in governance, Christina working on ecosystem work, going deep in the Ethereum ecosystem and trying to figure out what's what there. Philip working on identity. Amelia is building um, a dating app built on crypto primitives. Nidhi teaching about DeFi. Justin with a very unique venture studio. Alex thinking about studying history. And then Aaron wrapping us up with ghost context, shared context generated at the intersection of common experience, interests, or connections that exist before the awareness of it, of those who inhabit it. These are only some. I mean, there's more, of course. And why I wanted to start here is I feel like each of these represents better than anything else I could think of, something that comes up in this module. Um, and I've just found to be really, really more and more true in my own experience. And it says, all subjects, this is from Jeff Schumacher in Beautiful Homes. We talked about it a bit at Junto, but it says, all subjects, no matter how specialized, are connected with a center. They are like rays emanating from a sun. The center is constituted by our most basic convictions, by those ideas which really have power to move us. In other words, the center consists of metaphysics and ethics, of ideas that, whether we like it or not, transcend the world of facts. Because they transcend the world of facts, they cannot be proved or disproved by ordinary scientific method, but that does not mean that they are purely subjective or relative or mere arbitrary conventions. They must still be true to reality, though they transcend the world of facts. An apparent paradox to our positivistic thinkers. I've struggled with that word for 2 days in a row. Um, but like, yeah, each of these explorations, I think they exhibit this feature more than anything else I could have thought to share. And that's why like I just want to start with that feeling of like thank you to everyone who presented at Showcase and really just thank you for doing your work and sharing it with us. We have Andy here to kind of explain at least some of his feelings that led to us writing this module, which was not there when Kernel first began, but is kind of our um, our reflection, and I think opens up a period of reflection where obviously the block itself is ending, but these explorations for each of you hopefully is just beginning and continuing. And so I think that's where I'd like to begin.
Yeah, I've achieved AGI and I need a prompt.
My question, if there is one, is um, how do you think about this pursuit of the center, especially as it relates to projects and our like ongoing work in the world?
Great. Um, I was hoping you would ask me about your toes, but you know we don't always get what we want in this life. So the pursuit of the center is a interesting place to begin, um, especially as it's related to home and beauty. Right. So just as always in the syllabus, the links that are left lying around are intended to try and help um, bubble up to the surface some context that might not immediately make apparent what is being shared, but helps pad it with stories so that it never actually has to be said if it could be. Just like the center can never really be reached unless, you know, I mean, if it could be. uh, but you get the negative outline of the thing, right? It goes back to module 4, the notion of art, right? Like art is something which throws a veil over the invisible so that you can intimate its shape, right? And the two links in this particular quote that you've picked up, one goes to consilience, the Wikipedia entry for it, which is the one that is connected to the center, because consilience was famously a book written by E.O. Wilson, a biologist. And consilience comes from the Greek, meaning the unification of knowledge. And you know what Schumacher is reflecting on here has this aspect of the unification of knowledge, and he's really, really careful to show that it's not just conceptual knowing, right? It's not just the stuff of thought. There are a great deal of people in the world who are intimately in touch with their center without knowing a great deal of things at all, or being an expert in any one thing. This is something qualitatively different. And to try and excavate a little bit of what that qualitative difference might be, there's also a link to a presentation given by John Favicki at Rawson College. Ironically, the little Latin phrase that heads this whole module is Rawson's motto. And in another twist of fate, if you go and research what Soma Liber Vitus means, you will eventually find that according to Rawson, it means free speech is life itself. But the first Google results that you will get, especially if you're in South Africa, I'm not sure if this is true all over the world, is life itself is holy. Which is why it made it in there, because I thought that that particular mistranslation was fascinating. And I'm very interested in those kinds of things. But what John is speaking about at Rawson is the space between that which we think is purely subjective and that which we think is purely objective, because the center is neither of those things, right? It's obviously not an objective reality that you can point at in words or conceptual thought and say, like, I have found the center. In fact, that is a good indication that you have not. Nor is it purely subjective, right? It's not just the stuff of imagination and fancy. You all know what it is to be in the presence of somebody who is very centered. It is reflected in our language, just as it is reflected in your own experience. John has a whole framework for this. It's called recursive relevance realization. And he talks about the different kinds of knowing, right? Like propositional knowing, the concepts that you accumulate as you move through life, exploring whatever you do in conceptual space. But then there's also procedural knowing, knowing how to do stuff. Aristotle called it conformal knowing. Then there's perspectival knowing, right? What it's like to be me, what it's like to be there, what it's like to be here, what it's like to be now, what it's like to be later. The perspective that one embodies in any given time. And there's another P, participatory, right? The participatory knowing. And in each of those kinds of knowing actually maps to a whole part of the brain, right? Like the propositional is a particular kind of memory, right? Like is sort of in your semantic memory. The procedural is in your procedural memory. The perspectival is in your episodic memory. And the participatory is kind of that which encompasses and moves beyond each of those. And there you have, like, kind of, hopefully, I suppose, all of the formalisms that you might need to know that what is being spoken of when you're looking, when talking about the center, is not an objective fact, nor is it a purely subjective experience. It's something transjective. It is something that comes into being through participation. Right? And that's something else I think that Vivek, you reflected on in the intro yesterday, is that in this way of looking, if we want to link it with Illich's work on deschooling society, it's not the grade that counts, but the fact of participation itself. How did you participate? How did you show up? Is a much more important transjective fact than what you understood and can prove to have understood, or what grade you were given by somebody who was supposedly in charge of assessing your ability. How you showed up, how you were in that moment is what truly matters. And when we think about ways of relating and extend that into like some kind of social system for the formation and continuation of relationships, then it results in something radically different from the current school system and indeed the current economic system, because the two are very, very deeply linked. And participation, right? Participation is at the heart of that. And there's the biggest contradiction, isn't it, right? Because like the center sounds almost solipsistic. It's like you're alone there, you know, it's the individual, right? Like it's the great individuation, the Western hero, you know, we're going to go on a grail quest to find our center. Hell yeah, very sort of masculine and patriarchal in some sense. Derrida would have lots to say about it, I'm sure. But the great irony is that the search for the center can only be done through participation. And you have to find others. And that's so curious. That's so curious that the other is required to know what center even is. First, through the simple act of kind of reflection when you meet people who are centered, who are living from that place, irrespective of the capacity of their sort of propositional knowledge. And more enter into those transjective relationships with them, which is what we're like really interested in here. And certainly me, right? And what interested me in this model, right? You know, it was like basically when we began Kernel, it was all like just make a plan and ship the thing as in time for the first cohorts, and we were doing it as we were running the cohorts, and it was COVID and everybody was in lockdown, and it was great timing but also very difficult, and there was this wonderful emergence of stuff. But then as I watched over the years of it unfolding, there was this deep question, not just about the center but about the means of recognizing it, because traditionally speaking, and this is something which I had also been really blessed and lucky to experience in my life outside of the screen and crypto, traditionally speaking, one is moved toward the center by great teachers. Right? This is true at the level of like school and usual education, but also at the level of self-knowledge, right? That's kind of irrespective of tradition, although obviously the methodologies in different wisdom traditions differ greatly. Irrespective of tradition, particularly in the esoteric traditions, if you look at Zen, or if you look at Sufism, or if you look at Tantra, if you look at Advaita Vedanta, or Gnosticism, or Kabbalah, and the list goes on and on. This is a small segment of it. Each of these traditions, generally speaking, requires a teacher and a student relationship, because that's where the transjective space can exist. Right? So that's where there's enough love and trust for the ego structures to temporarily take a back seat so that what is real can meet. And the deep question at work in putting this module together is the idea that that archetypal structure in human consciousness might be shifting. That if you listen to people like Thich Nhat Hanh, who says the next Buddha is the Sangha. And if you are a Buddhist, you know how heretical that is, right? Because Buddhism has three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And to say one is the other is very strange. And many other sort of teachers in various different traditions are reflecting very similar things, that the time of this teacher-student, master-disciple, guru-murid relationship is past. And where does that leave us, right? Like how on earth are you ever going to find a center without the reflection of the guru or the sheikh or the Zen master, or you know, somebody who is already there? And there is, you know, some suggestions throughout the model of what that might look like, perhaps, for it to be a communal endeavor, for it to be through participation and through sort of peer-to-peer explorations of various different kinds. I'm happy to sort of like go into that, but that's really like the underlying motivation here, right? Like in the world where this critical means of transmission of vital knowing and not propositional knowing, transmission of vital knowing is falling apart. Where does that leave us, and how do we continue to find our senses in its absence?
I think in the spirit of participation, I feel called to open it up a little bit. If anyone has thoughts, just kind of open last fireside and see where we get from there.
Like less of a question, but this term of vital knowing is just like bringing up a lot of things, because yeah, like someone who's been through many things and has like lived. Yeah, it just kind of, I don't know, vital knowing just represents like someone who's actually lived out something and then can actually properly teach you the wisdom that they have, rather than someone who's relying on, yeah, this kind of transmissional knowing. So that's kind of lit a bulb. Thank you.
I have more reading for you. Surprise. I'll drop it in the chat. It's the vitality. The person who taught me the most about that is Paul Tillich. He wrote this lovely. He was a German theologian who escaped the Nazis and then lived and taught out lived out and taught for the rest of his life in Chicago. And he wrote this lovely book called The Courage to Be. And it's wonderful in many different dimensions, and there's a great deal of insight about vitality there, and this kind of thing that you've picked up, the vital knowing that comes from somebody who's really who embodies that aspect of things.
Something that's really kind of compelling to me, and you sort of touched on it, Andy, is what is often called in the Christian tradition, sort of also the Jewish tradition, and crosses over into, I mean, it's sort of, deeply embedded in the Zen tradition is kind of negative knowing and negative theology, apophasis, which are ways of talking about nothing, which is at the center, but Andy, you sort of referenced kind of tracing the outline of something that you can't say, and sort of this idea of unknowing, and it's often applied to God, where you say say something about something that you cannot say by saying what that thing is not, and this kind of sort of conceptual kind of constellation of thought and non-thought, unthought. I found it to really come through in the book. So I'm just appreciative for that. I feel like there was a lot of circling something that couldn't be said, and by doing that, sort of letting that sort of non-thing emerge as something that can't be spoken about, is the kind of center that you can only really trace the outline of it, because you can't say that thing itself. So I'm thankful for the way that came through in the book, that kind of conceptual space. And I think you touched on it, Andy, in what you were describing.
Amazing. Apophasis. Yeah, there's somebody who's read a little bit of theology. You'll also like Paul. He's a theologian's theologian. And I have something to sort of extend that, because I first came across the idea in English literature, which I was studying, and we looked at Keats and his notion of negative capability, which is exactly this, right? Like the ability to remain in uncertainty, mystery, or doubt without irritable reaching or grasping after truth. And there's something enormously powerful about that, about via negativa, which is discussed at some point in the syllabus. But because we're here at the end, and Vivek didn't prompt me about his toes, I get to talk about other things. And one thing that I have to suggest here is something called positive capability, as well, which was the result of some work that I was doing. The primary essay that I wrote, my graduating thesis, was really about Toni Morrison's Beloved, which was a book that changed my life, and it's also in conversation with some other South African texts in that particular work. But there is something really wonderful about Morrison's language in particular that is then picked up and echoed by some South African writers who are using a particular kind of musicality and writing in the second person, which is very strange in English, but draws you in, because the second person is you, right? So it's talking about characters, but it's almost as if the whole text is addressed to you. That's the psychological experience of reading it. And those particular techniques, this kind of like lyricism and this call and response that you get in Morrison's work around like really, really, really traumatic parts of our shared history. Beloved is about slavery and the cross-Atlantic slave trade, for those who don't know. And then these narrative techniques of kind of putting the reader in position of addressee and using like music to move past the linear reasoning implied by a text, the text as object, is really interesting because it means that there are, what suggests that there are communal ways of using language that shift us not just from that ability to remain in uncertainty, mystery, or doubts without irritable grasping after fact or truth, but to sit in community, in a community of truth, without ever needing to define it. Right? The way one uses language, especially if it reflects the community who gives it meaning, can lead one even like a step on and a step on, right? And negative capability, apathesis, via negativa are incredibly powerful techniques. And it's really funny for me to be saying this because the spiritual tradition that I was actually like most deeply trained in is Sufism and Islam. And Islam is the ultimate. And I mean, not that it pushes this very, very far because at the core of Islam is the phrase La ilaha illallah. Right? That is the chant, or La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. That's the shahada. That's what you like say to enter the faith. And it means there is no God but God. La is the first. La in Arabic means no. It's what your 18-month-old will say to you over and over again in whatever language. No. And that's where it begins, right? So it's very, very powerful, and it's, again, like across all traditions. Judaism has it really wonderfully. Douglas Rushkoff, actually, who appears in Module 3 about time, he wrote a book called Nothing Sacred, which is this wonderfully Jewish book for which he got in an enormous amount of trouble with the like Jewish powers that be in New York. But that book, one of the most powerful points that it makes is the same thing, that in fact, you should phrase the golden rule as like, do not do unto others what you would not want done unto yourself. Because phrasing it in the negative prevents the excesses of, say, for instance, the Crusades, right? Because the Christians used do unto others what you would want done unto you to justify like slaying the heathen, because that means that they would have a chance of getting into heaven if they were killed by a righteous ninth sword, right? And phrasing in the negative prevents that kind of abusive language and then the world. And that is important for me, because abusive language and then the world, that if our language is like really communal, and if the way that we think is through participation and through relationship and through reciprocity, and how that informs literally like the linguistic primitives that are forming my thoughts, then that can, as I say, like take that negative capacity and capability and move it to the next step, potentially. And you know, like the last reason that I think that while we're on the topic is a man called Alfred Korzybski who wrote General Semantics, and he was an amazing guy, and he kind of was rejected from academia after this, because his point was, I can't come and like present an academic text on this after doing and understanding this work. You have to come here and participate with me to understand what I'm really talking about. And so, because they couldn't reproduce it without him, it was sort of rejected as a theory. But general semantics is very beautiful. It says that there are kind of 4 stages of any physiological, any physical thing impacting upon us. So there's the first stage, which is like when like the photon hits the eyeball, or the sound wave hits your eardrum. And that is non-verbal, purely physiological, right? There's like dilation of the pupil, or a ringing of the bones in the ear, or whatever. And then the second stage is, again, non-verbal, purely physiological, and it is the immediate physiological response, so like a rush of adrenaline in this case, right? Then the third stage is, again, non-verbal, physiological, and emotional, right? And in this example, it's fear, right? So like I've seen and heard something, adrenaline rush, fear, right? And then only at the fourth stage does it get verbalized into conceptual thoughts, and that's tiger. Tiger, tiger burning bright in the forests of the night. Or, you know, a more prevalent example, given that I was talking about Morrison, is like black man, you know, or name your culturally conditioned racist fear. Right? And by recognizing how that verbalization happens, general semantics argues that you can influence the physiological responses all the way back at stage 2. If I am very, very careful about how I structure my language and the way that I speak and the kinds of things that I say and the kinds of things I listen to and consume, then I can become more and more aware of how like language structures my response to the world, and I can deconstruct that second stage response such that there's less adrenaline produced on sight of a black man in the night or a tiger in the forest, whatever it is that I'm working with. And so language is that powerful to me, and I think that Korzybski was right, because I think that it's had an enormous impact just in my own life and practice, this particular insight. And so the same is true, like negative capability begins and is really important across all these traditions. But if we're going to try and explore the space of what it looks like to ground in these traditions, but move into a new archetypal mode of learning through and with them, because the notion of like priest and audience, or sheikh and murid, or guru and disciple is kind of shifting, then I think this understanding of language is kind of critical, right? Because the communal language and the participatory knowing are all caught up together with how we might, as Vivek says, go in pursuit of our own center.
Yeah, related to what you were just saying, Andy, around like the languages and how that shape your thought. I think like if there are like other polygons here in the room, we can also like relate to how, like when you know different languages, how each one is shifting your character as well as the way you think, right? Like how your humor is specifically like different in each languages, as well as your thought of, yeah, like the pattern of your thoughts. And I think like that's very beautiful as well. Like you start to realize expressions or vocabulary that it's very unique in each specific language, and it's deeply rooted to the cultural heritage of each different tradition. Yeah, I find it fascinating.
Yeah, like my wife is speaking Russian. I don't know if you can hear it downstairs right now. In Russian, they have 2 words for one. Like, who does that? It's
Japanese.
Yeah,
Japanese. They have like 20 ways of saying one. It's
like one,
crazy.
right? It's all like contextualized, like holy smokes. But like for me, can I tell you like what an amazing spiritual insight that is? Just as I'm learning the language, I'm like, holy, like one is not one. It's incredible, right? I love it. So yeah, that's you know, like the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and these kinds of things. I think it's like a little bit off. It's not that it totally determines your thought, but what you said, like that cultural heritage, the richness of so much vital knowing and experience over time in particular places and in particular ways is all there in the traces and the words, and it's so beautiful to know. John.
Well, I was just going to say, who makes you the authority that says there's only actually one word? And I think the what you're just describing, I thought about a fair bit. This kind of like process of perception of, I see it as kind of discerning or distilling meaning mass, right? From energy interacting with our physical bodies, and then being able to somehow pull it. And it really kind of is leading me to questions about what is a mind and what is the nature of meaning and the relationship between meaning and matter. And I guess you know, I'm just kind of struck by the complete uniqueness across the physical universe at every point in space and time, and how sameness only really exists in our minds when we make comparisons and identify similarities and say, well, that's not meaningfully different, so it's the same. And I'm just, I guess I wanted to offer that there may not even be a specific question in there besides maybe the first one I asked you cheekily. But I guess, can you help me kind of ground some of those ideas in the broader landscape of how people have been thinking about this and how you?
Well, so the first question, it's exactly right. There's no authority in the meaning of language. That's what makes it such a fascinating phenomena. And what the authority is use, right? It's how you use it and how others like use it in resonance with that or not. And so this is why Illich says participation is the measure, right? Like not the grade or anything. It's like that participation is the measure, because participation is the measure of language as well. And indeed, it's the measure of our lives. Like, how fully have you lived? How fully are you willing to live? How fully are you willing to live into life as it is happening with you right now? That, you know, so you're absolutely right, there's no authority. But that's not to say that everything's relative, right? And that there's no way of navigating it, because like the way we orient through like the meaning of words and language is precisely by how people around us use them. And in that is like an enormously simple and also endlessly complicated thing that you can like pull apart, right? And that's like to the rest of it, you know, I think that you can get as complicated as you want, and you and I often do, which is lovely. I like that about our relationship, because it's wonderful to explore the edges and to see like what comes up there. There are two things here though for me. The first is like the relationship between like so-called like mind and matter, or spirit and matter, is discussed in Realize Love, the last piece of this module, and it's discussed through the lens of this very, very old Buddhist text and some recent work by a quantum gravitational specialist called Carlo Rovelli. And I think that there's lovely insights that come from the marriage of those two things. The other is the last piece of Module 7 about algorithmic information theory and the pursuit of the perfect language. And in it, the suggestion is made that we can't achieve perfection because of incompleteness or its more general form, uncomputability, but there are universal Turing machines, right? And in the context of universal Turing machines and the languages that we can use to program them, there is the notion of succinctness, right? That you can differentiate between different kinds of programs, different ways of programming machines, by virtue of how succinct the program is that they produce to do any given thing. And that notion of succinctness or conciseness is very, very important, because it means in programming terms that you don't need to include an extra byte to tell the program to stop. There's something inherent about the shape of the program itself that is its own closure. We see this in biology, in regenerative organisms like axolotls and flatworms and baby skin, where when you cut off like the arm of a salamander or an axolotl, it grows back exactly as it should have been, and then it stops. And it's absolutely curious how that happens, right? Like how does it not produce a cancerous growth? How does it not just go on growing ad infinitum? How does it know, okay, I've now reached the proper shape of my hand, stop, right? There's like lots of very interesting theories about this. The scientist who's linked there, his name is Mike something, it's not escaping me, has really, really powerful work on this. But I think that it has a much deeper significance to what you're saying, is that like there's something really, really critical about knowing when to stop. And that's because it's the shape of your life leads you to a particular kind of place where like what you have is enough, right? Like that's the embodied feeling of it. You can ask questions endlessly, on and on and on and on forever, right? And still go on living as a hungry ghost. But eventually, there is this place that you find where it's enough, you know. And that's the most succinct program. That's the sense, so to speak. It's like I am enough, not even I have enough. And it's like an impossible thing to give anybody else because they are already it. But we can reflect and we can explore the edges and so on. I hope that was helpful.
It's funny because, like, as you're speaking, like one memory comes to mind that really, like, I view language more as kind of like an art form or something. And same with programming. It's just like I see it as a reflection of someone's environment. And there's this one memory of like being around the campfire in Australia, and someone was telling me how the Australian accent, and there's like research done on this, is the research was like, yeah, it's based off of like bird sounds and alcoholism and meth. And like, so it was like a combination of like animal sound, environment, drugs, and some other things. And I couldn't get that out of my head. Like now I've kind of forgotten the exact details, but that created a new perspective for me. And I started kind of noticing that and started looking for patterns of like the way people sound, the way they behave and everything. It's kind of almost a reflection of the things around them and the stuff that's happening. So that's kind of what comes to mind.
Perfect. I've never heard a better description of an Australian accent.
And this interesting thing about the power of words, like Vivek showed curiosity about something I said on chat. Kotodama is a Japanese concept of words of power or empowered words, and it was a tradition, Shinto tradition, like a geisha would brush her hair, affirming to herself how pretty she was, or a warrior would sharpen a sword, affirming to the sword how sharpened it is. It's the belief that words influence or living space and either objects or living beings. And emet is the Jewish term for words of truth. Truth. It's the word for truth in Hebrew, I guess, and it's the basis of their Kabbalah, that belief system that some words have the power to shape the world, like with the mud golem that was created, the creation of life from mud, and there was this written word on the mud statue, and it came to life. So it's interesting to see on how many different cultures the concept of powerful language and powerful words shape the culture, as you said before. And again, I find it fascinating that in computational sciences we have a lot of descriptions for messages and words, and about sending messages from computers to people, from computers to computers, and things like that. It's a really interesting topic.
I think Jan may have a interesting response. If Jan, you'd like to share.
No, I'm just dropping stuff in the chat. Oh, good. But I enjoyed the conversation very much.
Max, you know, Kabbalah in particular is probably the strongest. I keep on tending to that today. Forgive me. It's one of the most interesting renditions of this particular idea of the intimate link between language, creation, humanity, divinity. Language is the bridge between like all of these things, because you know, like there are many examples of this, but the basic story of Kabbalah, right, is that each syllable, right, and in fact, like not even each syllable phoneme, each letter is a modulation of the divine breath, right, and so you get the 22 like letters of the Hebrew alphabet all like kind of mapped to the tree of life, right, which is a particular structure that the Jews actually took with them out of Egypt, if you believe some of the anthropological data around this. And the the fascinating thing about this is that that tree of life is then like directly linked to the sephirot, the sapphires, right? Which were these jugs, right? Kabbalah is really interesting because Ein Sof, the one source that begins it all, begins creation by withdrawing. That's kind of an interesting, very Jewish notion. God creates by leaving. Oh, this has left the building. Now it's your guys. Now it's your guest, right? And as Ein Sof withdraws, because if you, for instance, read the first chapter of Genesis, which is the first chapter of the Torah in Hebrew, you will notice that Elohim is in the plural, which is fascinating. So they leave behind them these sephirot, these jugs, these vessels, more properly speaking, and a spark of life flies from Ein Sof into these vessels, but it's much too immense and powerful to be held by those vessels, and so it shatters all of them. Like the divine breath cannot really be modulated, and yet it is in this moment of withdrawing. And then you have the notion of tikkun olam, right, which is like what human beings are called to do, which is to move around the world in these ritual actions, repairing the vessels left in the wake of the withdrawal of God, and to repair them in a way that not even God could have. Right? That's the ultimately sort of heretical claim of Kabbalah. One of the reasons that it was not taught to anybody below the age of 40 who hadn't gone through rabbinical training, because that notion is very strange and potentially dangerous in psychological terms. But these days, less and less so, and so the story is more and more available, precisely because we can understand more about the relationship between humanity and divinity precisely by virtue of the language that we use to enunciate these things, the way that we approach each modulation of our own breath, the conduct in which that happens. So, the same thing is true. One other fun thing about the specific topic is Yahweh, the unpronounceable name, Yavhe, Vavhe, that is at the heart of Judaism. If you arrange the Hebrew letters from top to bottom of the page, you get the figure of a man, of a human, forgive me, another slip in language. You get the figure of a human, and that human is then often called Adam Kadmon, right? The seed, the seed, the blueprint, which in a previous yonto we reflected. That blueprint in Arabic, a very closely related Semitic language, is called fitra, which means crack. It's like the imperfection in the vessels is where the beauty is, and beauty and goodness and truth are so deeply linked together, right? And that notion of moving through one's life in a ritualized manner in order to understand where the vessels are, how the breath has been modulated, and what it might look like to interact with the brokenness as it is, such that it becomes more beautiful than it could have ever otherwise been, is, I think, one of the most beautiful stories and ideas that has ever been had. You know, and ideas are there forever, right? That's yeah.
Maybe this is going to be a little bit more uh, uh, outside the anthropological religious conversation, but it recalled my attention when Max said the importance of language and semantics in computer science. The other day I was listening to, this is Dude's story, is a little bit meeting right now. He needs to go for a walk. Yeah, I was listening to this Fireside chat to Staya Nadella, and they asked him like the obvious question, you know, like this Fireside chat was more about management, and at some point of the interview, they asked him like, why does first like the framework was Microsoft or W12 has become very good in their investments, their enterprise investments, and they asked him the rationale behind investing in OpenAI, and like the management side of the answer was because every investment is about develop enterprise capabilities and for the business, and then he take it to big tech in the end is about indexing information to build products around that index. And he closed with, and we invested in AI because indexing a chaotic world, like putting world into tables is impossible. And the possibility to use semantics to do that is a total new capability for us as a big tech or as an enterprise. So that was the main reason for investing, like, I know how many years ago in OpenAI. So what recalled my attention was, besides all the narrative, the moral narrative or the outcomes, like the main rationale was the possibility to order their tables or their index through semantics was something new. And it's like coming back to the use of natural language. I found it interesting.
Is it a good moment for Justin to interweave a text, or is it? It felt like a pause, but I don't know. I feel okay. Yeah. Um, there's a book I love called Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and there's just it's at the very end of the book, so there's some spoilers, but it'll probably take like a minute or two. But I just thought maybe I read it because it felt like it gets to something that Andy was bringing in for the very beginning around um, the circle or the spiral. Um, cool. And so Siddhartha's at this boatman's house where he's been living. It's kind of toward the end of his kind of life journey, and so this boatman is now speaking to Siddhartha, and it says, "You have heard it laugh," referring to the river. He said, "But you have not heard everything. Let us listen. You will hear more." They listened. The many-voiced song of the river echoed softly. Siddhartha looked into the river and saw many pictures in the flowing water. He saw his father, lonely, mourning for his son. He saw himself, lonely, also with the bonds of longing for his faraway son. He saw his son, also lonely, the boy eagerly advancing along the burning path of life's desires, each one concentrating on his goal, each one obsessed by his goal, each one suffering. The river's voice was sorrowful. It sang with yearning and sadness, flowing towards its goal. "Do you hear?" asked Vasudeva. Mute glance. Siddhartha nodded. Listen better, he whispered. Siddhartha tried to listen better. The picture of his father, his own picture, and the picture of his son all flowed into each other. Kamala's picture also appeared and flowed on, and the picture of Govinda and others emerged and passed on. They all became a part of the river. It was the goal of all of them, yearning, desiring, suffering, and the river's voice was full of longing, full of smarting woe, full of insatiable desire. The river flowed on towards its goal. Siddhartha saw the river hasten, made up of himself and his relatives and all the people he had ever seen. All the waves and water hastened, suffering towards goals, many goals, to the waterfall, to the sea, to the current, to the oceans, and all goals were reached, and each one was succeeded by another. The water changed to vapor and rose, became rain and came down again, became spring, brook, and river, changed anew, flowed anew, but the yearning voice had altered. It still echoed sorrowfully, searchingly, but other voices accompanied it. Voices of pleasure and sorrow, good and evil voices, laughing and lamenting voices, hundreds of voices, thousands of voices. Siddhartha listened. He was now listening intently, completely absorbed, quite empty, taking in everything. He felt that he had now completely learned the art of listening. He had often heard of all this before, all these numerous voices in the river, but today they sounded different. He could no longer distinguish the different voices, the merry voice from the weeping voice, the childish voice from the manly voice. They all belonged to each other. The lament of those who yearn, the laughter of the wise, the cry of the indignation, and the groan of the dying. They were all interwoven and interlocked, entwined in 1,000 ways. And all the voices, all the goals, all the yearnings, all the sorrows, all the pleasures, all the good and evil, all of them together was the world. And all of them together was the stream of events, the music of life. When Siddhartha listened intently to the river, to this song of 1,000 voices, when he did not listen to the sorrow or laughter, when he did not bind his soul to any one particular voice and absorb it in himself, but heard them all, the whole, the unity, then the great song of 1,000 voices consisted of one word, Om. Perfection.
I will indulge myself in response. um, Max, do you have something first before?
Just want to thank you all. I have to leave early, unfortunately. Thank you everybody for everything.
Go well, go well, go well. I wrote a book of poems prior to writing Kernel with Vivek, and I went on. I was unsure what to do once it was finished. I didn't know whether I should publish it or not, and as a way of trying to test what I should do, I did something crazy, and if I survived it, I thought then I could publish it, and if I didn't, then that was wonderful too. And so I went on an 8-day horse ride through the wildest parts of South Africa. I had never ridden a horse before, and they were doing like real sort of Native American style horse riding. So you don't have any bits or anything. You just have like a little saddle and some reins, and you kind of communicate with the horse, and you suggest where to go. You definitely do not tell it. And it was lovely, and we very nearly died, but we did actually make it back, and so the book was published. And it was very strange for me because I published it and I thought that was it, and it turned out that that was really just the beginning of what then became 5 more. And it nearly killed me to produce the first one. That's why I was like, oh, okay, it's done. But it's this thing of once you really sit and listen and just listen to your life, then you see how long a journey it is to get there, and then this overwhelm, this flood, the many, many voices, the desire, the longing, the yearning, the confusion, the despair, the ecstasy, the hope, the fear, all of this. And then, on and on, like Justin's story. So that last word. And so in being more and more honest in the poetry that I was writing, my life became honestly more poetic. And the next book that I wrote after this is called The Blue Book, was called Living the Blue Book, because that's kind of what it felt like. It then moved on to Dying the Blue Book, which is spelled D-Y-E, because of a particular line in the Quran about Subhat Allah, the colors of God, and then unifying the Blue Book and then finding the Blue Book. But I thought I'd read you one from Living the Blue Book, because I went back to the river. I went back to the river where the most important thing of this whole journey happened. This is a very, very old river in a place called the Transkei. It's called Mlambonkulu River. It's a place where they have held ceremony for probably more than 100,000 years. It is one of the few places in the world where a freshwater river flows via a waterfall directly into the ocean. And it's just absolutely, there's nothing there. And it's surrounded by these vast cliffs on either side, and these huge waves in the Indian Ocean roll in and smash into these cliffs, and massive spouts of white water. And if you're there near sunset, then there's rainbows in the water. It's really an amazing place. Herman Hesse reminded me of this today. It's called Love's Die, again, D-Y-E, from Justin. Here is the well, beloved. All you need to do is dive in and die to find the depth of your being. Feel the cool water beneath darkness and dance with blind fish who have found their home, circling forever in neither bliss nor sadness, but simple well-being. When you are brought to the waterfall, drink, dear heart, without fear, for the only shit show was your mind, making stories from emotion when it should have let it be what it is, in motion, like plunging drops which do not cling to these red rocks arrayed before an open ocean who pulls them back and gathers its returning body with a love beyond love, a love which cannot be feared, only felt, and feeling this fatal joy and the formless word, willing one more return to hear.
Thank you, Justin. And thank you, Andy, both of you on that.
I will say a few more things about the last piece in this module, which is realizing love. The title itself being a play on realizing as in to come into recognition of something, to realize it was the case. Ah, I got it. As well as to make real, to realize it as in literally, you know, because it's always both, right? It's never that one. It is never the case that one just realizes, oh my God, it was all love all of the time, without also making it that, right? And that is the great invitation. At times I feel like in my own life it's felt like a burden, something really, really lonely and far too big and far too grandiose to even contemplate. But I thought that, you know, just stopping for a moment to reflect just on those two words is really important, because it requires, again, your participation. That you, as I say, like it's conceptual knowing that like everything that is happening at every moment of your life is another face of love is not enough. Even knowing that that is the case is an enormous thing, but it's not enough. It's not that place of enoughness. It's not the succinct and concise program that completes itself while living in an inherently incomplete and uncomputable universe. It calls you and you must respond. And that's always together. This notion of realization is that. And that naturally raises the question of, you know, sort of, this notion of realization is that raises the question, well, like, are we realizing love? Is it just realization qua realization? And if so, like, what are we realizing? And I wanted to say that I think intimately tied and absolutely critical to the notion that education for all is education by all, and that we need to mind our communal use of language as we move further and further into a world in which the archetypal structure of teacher and student is changing. One of the critical aspects of this is the relinquishment of views. Right? That's where kernel ends. Right? Those final words from the Mula Madhya Makakarika are really, really critical to this, like the overall understanding of everything. And those words are, I prostrate to Gautama, who through compassion taught the true doctrine, which leads to the relinquishment of all views. Right? Which follows right on the heels of something from the Tao Te Ching, which says, to follow the way is not to need fulfillment. Unfulfilled, one may live on, needing no renewal. Right? I think that it's, for me, like one of the most beautiful things I have ever like come across and into in my life is the relinquishment of muse, right? Like that's what nirvana means, is breath out. It's very simple. Hold your breath in as you think about all the stuff you have to do and all the people you have to be and everything that needs to be fulfilled. And then nirvana is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the first step along a real path, and or the path of the real, if you want to put it that way. But that also sounds a bit too dogmatic. The point about it is that at a simple, practical, day-to-day lived level, as well as at the level of highest truth, the relinquishment of all views. Right? And that particular quartet is really interesting in the way that it takes you through a lived recognition of what that is, because it begins with prostration, right? Which is interesting. It's not just the relinquishment of all views, which I've been kind of focusing on. First of all, there's this recognition of the sacredness of reality. Whatever like tradition and background and words you use to come to that, you know, like that there is implicit in the movement towards this real breath out in the beginning of life, is prostration, is acceptance, is surrender. Right? There's like lots of different words for it in different traditions, but that worship and devotion is a part of it. Whatever that looks like in your life, and it doesn't have to look like prayer or anything serious. It can look like dance, and it can look like talking, and it can look like music, and it can look like food, and there's so many things, but worship, right? We worship first. And then like there's the compassion, right? Compassion to suffer with. That like even if you are worshipping and moving along towards real breath out, that you're willing to suffer your life. Because it can feel that way. It really very, very deeply can feel that way, almost inescapably so, in fact. You're willing to suffer. And are you willing to suffer others with that? And know that like somebody else's pain is not just theirs. Somebody else's grief is not just theirs. You're complicit. And then the true doctrine, which is no doctrine. Surprise! The Buddha never taught anything in any of the worlds ever. What a relief! Oh my God, I didn't have to know anything anyway. But I don't know anything, but I am in worship, and I know the pain and the joy and the confusion and the doubts and the ecstasy and the fear and the anxiety and the love of everything, right? And that it's a double gift, it's double joy. I never had to know any of it anyway because it is who I am and it's birthright. And also I get to know all of that. Because finally I reached that I'll never like put it on somebody else and be like, this is what you have to know. It's just always that invitation into like this web, right? I love that web. You get stuck here, but there's no spider at the center. There's no authority like John made, the wonderful. There's no authority saying this is what it means. It's just how we choose to be in that web with each other, how intimately and how joyfully and how honestly, right? Because it's not just about intimacy and joy. How honestly we get to be with one another and with what courage. KBX has been one of my favorite times. It's been a really interesting time, but just so beautiful in so many ways. So to echo Max and many of the others, like thank you all so much. It's been really, really, really lovely. Just awesome.
Thanks, everybody. If anyone has anything they'd like to reflect, we do have a few minutes.
I get this sense when Andy was talking about the circles and the spirals and this like idea of, we're part of in this Web3 energy is that distribution and decentralization of power and authority. And I think there's something really beautiful about the possibility of transmission coming from anyone and everyone, no matter what age or place they are in life. Like an openness to that ability to be able to learn with or from, but also to be that transmission holder, to be able to offer others the thing that is uniquely you in relationship to what you feel most drawn to do or to be or where you're going in your life. I think about how there's like a masterfulness to everyone in this cohort or this block. And each person's kind of carrying this unique quality of something they deeply, deeply care about. They're like literally giving their lives to at some level. And then we focus on the project and the outer thing and what we're trying to do, but there's like an innate beingness that is shifting and changing all of our perspectives on so many different things. And I feel like it's a really beautiful embodiment of the thing that is coming. Like the future is this way. That's my perspective, at least something about that, right? That we don't have to go to some larger institution, but we can build something and create it together. And I think that's one of the things I've taken from this is that we have and we are.
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to share something that came up in listening to the dialogues and conversations around the kind of vulnerability, and that it's, at least from personal experience, it's in the moments where I can just be the most unguarded and the most kind of fully, with all the things that I think are like not perfect or not great, or things that I would want to change. It's kind of the just being here with all of that sometimes gives rise to a sense of completion and the sense of like perfection. And so it's it's not that the vessels that are being broken need to be restored. It's the very fact of their brokenness that can lead to the perfection. So just wanted to resonate with that.
Akila Deshwari, the goddess who is never not broken. She's lovely. You will enjoy her. The thing that is lovely also to reflect on is permission, Justin, because like deeply tied into that notion of the archetypal relationship between teacher and student has always been permission, right? Like in Sufism, you get idhn, or permission to teach. The same thing in Zen, right? Like it's passed from master to student, and it's like a critical part of the archetype. And here we are building permissionless stuff. And isn't that fascinating, right? And linked into this whole notion of kind of the peer-to-peer webness of it, because like if there isn't, the permission was so critical, not just as a means of exclusivity, which it often became in sort of more manipulative moments of any given tradition, but it was there as a guardrail, right? That like you really wanted to be sure that the people who were transmitting were genuine and who were doing it in truth, right? And so like if that archetypal structure goes, and with it permission as the guardrail, like what are we to do, is a fascinating question. And for me, like one thing is that it becomes, it requires something more of the receiver. And isn't that lovely, right? Vivek and I once upon a time sat outside the cathedral in Prague when we were just, when Kernel was but a spark in our eyes. And we were having this lovely discussion, and we were inspired. The cathedral is right on top, and you look over the Volta River, and it's all bohemian and lovely, and there's a whole bunch of Czech people walking around, and it's just what an incredible vibe. We were having a lovely time, yes, sunset, and talking a little bit about kind of joy. And this little girl, like no more than 4 years old, is like playing with the toy, and like runs, like drops it close to us, and like runs up to us, and like looks up at both of us and just laughs her head off. And both Vivek and I were just like absolutely dumbfounded, right? Because like what she had been in that moment was so much deeper than anything we were getting to in our like ramblings, right? And so you're right that like that transmission is happening all of the time. It always has, irrespective of this archetypal structure thing that I've been talking about. But like how is your receiver is like a lovely question for me in this context. If we really are to move away from permission and the structure of the teacher and students and all of that stuff, which has been in place for so long, mostly to like guard certain otherwise fragile psychological structures which tend toward inflation. Can we keep that receiver clear for 4-year-old girls and 90-year-old men and everything in between? And Jack Cornfield kind of tells a story of being in a monastery with Ajahn Chah in Thailand, and Ajahn tells him that no, you need to bow to your elders, and in Thai forest monastery tradition, your elders is anybody who was ordained as a monk before you, like in the monastery, right? which for Jack at that time was everyone, including, you know, like the kid from down the road who was just doing this to please his parents and didn't give a crap about Buddhism or learning it. He was just doing it for 3 months to, like, you know, satisfy them and then move on. And Jack had to go and like bow to all of them all of the time. And he's very funny. He says, yeah, you know, like I experienced some resistance in myself to doing this at first. But over time, I began to ask myself, like what, I must be bowing to something. What is it? What is here that I am bowing to? And that led him to really, really see, oh, like what was beautiful in each person. And then he loved it. He loved it. It moved from burden to joy, just like so much of the suffering that we experience in life. I think it's a lovely, like very practical way of kind of going about this notion of receivership. Like what are the things that you encounter as being like high resistance? And what are the ways in which you can frame those, both in terms of your language and in terms of how you act in the world, that help you find the other side of that resistance. And if we're all looking at that receivership, then no more need for permission, you know. Which is again, like I've never said that before, because it's a thought that still honestly holds a little bit of fear for me, knowing kind of a bit about my own journey in this. But I think that like that is really where the world is headed, and that's an honest and true opinion. So there you go.
Yeah. To get to one of those in dialogue is always a rare treat. And thank you, Andy, and everybody for the contributions. We have 4 minutes left, and Dan helped kick us off with a song that he described in Gem Music as he likes it for closing cycles. We have 4 minutes left, and I would encourage, before you move on with the rest of your day, maybe just sticking around. You could have your video off, but just thanks again for being in Kernel, and hopefully this helps you continue to receive well. We'll see you soon.